The spit landed on my left cheek, still warm. 800 people watched. Nobody moved. My own son turned away. His bride's father stood over me, grinning, like he had just crushed an insect. I was 70 years old. Grease under my fingernails. A rusted truck in the parking lot. And a secret worth more than every person in that room combined. I wiped my face. Then I smiled. Thank you for being here with me. Drop your city or country in the comments. I read every single one. And if you have ever had to stand up for your dignity when the whole world expected you to sit down, hit that like button and subscribe to support the channel. A quick note. Some elements in this story are fictionalized to deepen the emotional impact. Any resemblance to real individuals or places is completely unintentional. But the lesson behind it is absolutely real. They had seated me outside the ballroom. Not at a back table. Not in a dim corner. Outside. In the carpeted service corridor of the Greenbrier Resort in White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia, where catering staff rolled stainless steel carts past my chair every few minutes, and the swinging kitchen doors sent blasts of hot dishwater air across my neck. A single round table draped in plain white cloth. One chair. One place setting. One glass of lukewarm water. That was my seat at my only son's wedding. I did not complain. I sat with my rough hands folded on the cheap tablecloth and watched the celebration through the open double doors. Inside, 800 guests moved beneath crystal chandeliers. Senators shook hands with coal executives. Hedge fund managers clinked champagne flutes with energy lobbyists. Their laughter echoed across polished marble like music, composed exclusively for the wealthy. Somewhere in that dazzling sea of silk and diamonds, my son Jake danced with his new bride Nicole. She looked stunning in a custom gown that probably cost more than my truck. Jake looked like a stranger. The boy who once sat cross-legged on my garage floor handing me socket wrenches was now gliding across a ballroom in a tuxedo that fit like a second skin. He looked like he belonged. He did not. I built the bridge that carried him here. He just never looked back to see who was still standing on the other side. My rented suit pinched across the shoulders. The stiff fabric pulled against muscles that had spent 4 decades turning wrenches and lifting engine blocks in bitter Pittsburgh winters. My hands were scrubbed clean tonight, but the permanent dark lines embedded in my knuckles betrayed me. No amount of soap could erase 30 years of engine grease. I smelled him before I heard him. An aggressive cloud of expensive bourbon and imported cologne rolled toward my table. Victor Ashford, the bride's father, stopped directly in front of me. Tall, broad-chested, silver-haired, with a deep tan from winters on private Caribbean islands. Custom black tuxedo. Silk pocket square. A thick gold watch that caught the light like a weapon. His eyes were glassy with liquor, but his sneer was perfectly sharp. He did not extend a hand. He simply stood there radiating contempt. "Aldridge," he said. Loud enough for the catering staff to hear. "What exactly are you still doing here?" "The ceremony is over. We are about to begin the executive photographs for the business journals. I need this hallway cleared. I am waiting for the father-son dance, Victor." It is customary for the groom's father to remain until the end. His laugh cracked through the corridor. 2 waiters froze. A woman in a catering uniform glanced nervously through the kitchen door. Victor wanted an audience. "The father of the groom," he repeated, raising his voice so it carried into the ballroom. Guests near the doorway turned. "Look at yourself. Grease under your fingernails. A $40 suit from a strip mall. You fix cars for a living. You are a grease monkey who somehow produced a son ambitious enough to marry above his station. You should be grateful I let you sit in the hallway instead of the parking lot." A slow heat gathered behind my ribs. Not rage. Something quieter. Something with weight. Through 30 years of silence, Jake believed I was simply a mechanic who changed oil and replaced brake pads. He never questioned how his Ivy League tuition was paid without a single loan. He never wondered how I covered the down payment on his first apartment. He assumed I was careful with money. Ordinary. Small. Just yesterday, when Nicole's floral arrangements exceeded the budget by $35,000 and Victor refused to cover the overage, I quietly wrote the check. The towering orchid displays framing the ballroom stage had been purchased by the grease-stained hands Victor was mocking. Victor stepped closer, bourbon thick on his breath. I built an energy empire, Aldridge. Coal, natural gas, real power, the kind that keeps the lights on while your type tinkers with lawnmower engines. He jabbed a finger toward the ballroom. Senators return my calls. My name is carved into buildings in Charleston. And you? You are an embarrassment. Your son begged me not to seat you inside. Did you know that? That last sentence landed harder than anything else. Not because it was cruel, because it might have been true. Victor leaned down, his face inches from mine. Go home, mechanic. You are dragging down the value of this event simply by breathing in this building. I am not leaving, Victor. Something dark flashed across his face. Men like Victor had never been told no by someone they considered beneath them. His jaw tightened. His nostrils flared, and with a speed that startled even the waiters watching from the kitchen doorway, Victor Ashford drew back his head and spat directly into my face. Warm saliva struck my left cheek and slid toward my jaw. The corridor went silent. Through the open doors, the jazz quartet stopped mid-note. 800 of the most powerful people in the Appalachian region turned and stared at the old mechanic, sitting alone with spit running down his face. I did not flinch. I sat perfectly still and let the silence stretch until it became unbearable for everyone except me. Then I lifted my rough hand, wiped my cheek with the back of my knuckles, and looked directly at Victor Ashford. I smiled. You have no idea what you just started. His grin faltered for half a second. A flicker of uncertainty, quick as a spark, then gone. He straightened his pocket square, turned his broad back, and strode into the ballroom to rejoin his empire of applause. I remained seated. The spit dried on my knuckles. The kitchen doors resumed their rhythmic swinging, and somewhere inside that glittering room, my son was dancing with his new wife, pretending his father did not exist. I did not move from that chair. The spit had dried into a faint stiffness along my jaw, but I made no effort to wipe it again. The kitchen doors behind me continued their mechanical rhythm, swinging open and shut, pushing warm air against the back of my neck. Inside the ballroom, the jazz quartet resumed as if nothing had happened. 800 guests returned to their champagne and conversation, the brief disruption already fading into the comfortable fog of wealth and indifference. But I was not watching them. My eyes had found Jake. He was standing near the far edge of the dance floor, partially hidden behind a towering floral arrangement. Nicole had her hand on his arm, whispering something close to his ear. His jaw was tight. His eyes were fixed on the marble floor. He had seen everything. I knew he had. From where he stood, he had a direct line of sight, through the open double doors, into the corridor. He had watched his bride's father walk up to me. He had watched the spit leave Victor's mouth. He had watched it land on his father's face. And he had not moved. Now he was walking toward me. My chest tightened involuntarily. For one fragile, irrational second, something ancient stirred inside me. Hope, the stubborn, foolish hope that only a father can feel when his child approaches after a moment of injustice. Perhaps he had been frozen by shock. Perhaps Nicole had held him back. Perhaps he was coming to apologize, to stand beside me, to say the words every humiliated father longs to hear. I am sorry, Dad. That was wrong. Let me fix this. Jake stopped 3 feet in front of my table. He did not sit down. He did not reach for my shoulder. He stood with his hands buried in the pockets of his tailored tuxedo, and when he finally looked at me, his eyes held no outrage, no sympathy, no loyalty, only embarrassment. Dad, please. His voice was low, strained, barely above a whisper. You are making this worse. Victor is furious, and Nicole is upset. Everyone saw what happened and now they are all staring at the hallway. Can you just go? Call a cab. Drive home. We will talk about this later. The words entered my chest like cold metal. I stared at my son. At the boy I had raised entirely alone since the night his mother died. Linda passed when Jake was 6 years old. A heart condition no one caught in time. One Thursday evening, she kissed Jake goodnight, walked into our bedroom, and collapsed on the hardwood floor. I found her. When I came inside from the garage, my hands still black with motor oil. The paramedics arrived in 9 minutes. It was 7 minutes too late. After the funeral, I sat at our kitchen table at 2 a.m. and made a silent vow. I would give Jake everything Linda would have wanted him to have. Not wealth, not luxury. Character. Discipline. The understanding that nothing in this life was owed to you. That everything meaningful had to be earned with your own 2 hands. I worked 14-hour days in that garage. I rebuilt engines before sunrise and welded exhaust pipes after dark. On weekends, I drove Jake to Little League practice in my rusted truck, his small cleats propped on the cracked dashboard. I sat beside him at the kitchen table every night while he struggled through algebra, never once raising my voice when he got frustrated, never once letting him quit. When the transmission on a customer's sedan paid less than expected, I skipped meals so Jake could have new sneakers for school. When his 8th grade science project needed materials I could not afford, when he got accepted into an Ivy League university with a tuition that could have bought my garage twice over, I paid every single cent without hesitation and told him it came from a savings account Linda had started before she died. It was the first lie. It would not be the last. Standing in that corridor now, looking up at the polished stranger my son had become, I searched his face for some trace of the boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during late-night drives home from baseball tournaments. The boy who once handed me a Father's Day card made from notebook paper and electrical tape that read, "Dad, you are the strongest person in the whole world." I could not find him. "I am not leaving, Jake," I said quietly. "I am your father. I have the right to be at your wedding." Jake exhaled sharply through his nose. His jaw tightened the same way Victor's had moments earlier, and the resemblance sent a chill through my stomach. He had already begun absorbing the mannerisms of the family he had married into. The way he squared his shoulders. The way his lip curled slightly when he was annoyed. These were not his gestures. They were Victor's. "Dad," he said, his voice dropping further. Almost a hiss. "Nicole's family has plans for us. Important plans. Big plans. And right now, you standing out here with that look on your face is making everything harder. I need you to understand that this is my life now. This is where I belong." He paused. His eyes briefly met mine, then slid away. "Just go home." He turned around. Nicole appeared at his side instantly, threading her arm through his, guiding him back toward the glittering interior. I watched my son walk away from me. His steps were smooth and unhurried. He did not glance back. Not once. He simply dissolved into the sea of tuxedos and silk gowns as though the man sitting in the hallway had never existed at all. The ballroom doors drifted partially closed. The music swelled. Laughter resumed. I sat alone in the service corridor of a luxury resort with a dried streak of another man's spit on my face and the fresh memory of my only child telling me to disappear. The kitchen doors swung open behind me. A young waiter carrying a tray of dirty champagne glasses glanced at me, hesitated, then walked past without a word. Something inside my chest did not break. It did not shatter or collapse or bleed. It hardened. Like engine metal cooled too fast. Brittle on the outside but dense enough to cut through anything. The father who had spent 30 years forgiving every slight, absorbing every disappointment, and loving without condition, felt something fundamental shift beneath the surface. I looked down at my hands. Rough, scarred, permanently stained, with decades of honest labor. These hands had held Jake as an infant, when Linda could not. These hands had built a life from nothing. And tonight, those same hands had been mocked, dismissed, and spat upon while my son watched and chose silence. I pressed my palms flat against the white tablecloth and slowly pushed myself to my feet. The chair scraped softly against the carpet. I did not look toward the ballroom. I walked down the corridor toward the hotel lobby, past the polished brass fixtures and the oil paintings of mountains, past the doorman who held the glass exit open with a practiced smile. The humid West Virginia night wrapped around me like a damp cloth. My rusted 2005 Ford pickup sat in the far corner of the parking lot, surrounded by gleaming foreign sports cars and polished black luxury sedans. It looked like a stray dog that had wandered into a kennel of show breeds. I climbed inside. The torn leather seat groaned under my weight. I sat in the darkness, hands on the steering wheel, staring through the cracked windshield at the glowing resort entrance. Music and golden light spilled from inside. Somewhere behind those walls, my son was laughing. I turned the key. The engine sputtered once, then caught, and then my phone buzzed. For one brief, foolish heartbeat, something human stirred inside my chest. Perhaps Jake had come to his senses. Perhaps the shock of watching his father humiliated had finally cracked through whatever polished shell Nicole's family had built around him. Perhaps there was an apology waiting on that glowing screen. Late and desperate and ashamed, I pulled the phone from my jacket pocket. The blue-white glow of the screen illuminated the dark cabin of the truck, casting sharp shadows across the cracked dashboard and the torn leather seats. It was not Jake. It was an automated alert from First National Bank. Insufficient funds. Transaction denied. I stared at the words. I read them twice, slowly, as if they might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. That account held exactly $200,000. It was the account Jake believed contained my entire life savings. Every dollar a retired mechanic had scraped together over 4 decades of oil changes and brake jobs. The modest sum a simple man would stretch carefully across whatever years he had left. I tapped the notification. The transaction details loaded slowly on the old phone, bar by bar, pixel by pixel. Each line that appeared tightened something deeper in my chest. Wire transfer. $200,000. Recipient, Ashford Mountain Resources, LLC. Initiated by Jake Aldridge. Authorized through joint account access. The air inside the truck cabin became suddenly thin. I read the details again. Then a third time. The routing numbers. The timestamps. The authorization code generated from the shared security credentials Jake and I had set up years ago when he was in college, back when I added his name to the account for emergencies, for trust, for the kind of safety net a father builds beneath his only child without ever expecting it to be used as a weapon. Ashford Mountain Resources, LLC. I knew that name. It was a subsidiary of Victor's coal and gas empire. A shell company buried 3 layers deep in corporate filings. I had seen it referenced in financial documents that crossed my desk in another life. A life Jake knew nothing about. The money had not gone toward a family emergency. It had not gone toward a down payment on a home or a medical bill, or any of the desperate reasons a son might access his father's savings without asking. It had gone directly into Victor Ashford's operation. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. The cracked leather groaned beneath my grip. I sat in the darkness of that parking lot and let the full architecture of the betrayal assemble itself piece by piece. They had not just humiliated me in front of 800 people. They had not just spat in my face and told me I was worthless. They had reached into my pockets while I sat in that hallway and emptied everything they believed I had. Jake had used our shared account. Jake had entered the security credentials only he and I knew. Jake had authorized a wire transfer of $200,000 to his father-in-law's company. While I was sitting outside the ballroom, being told I was not worthy of breathing the same air. The wedding was not a celebration. It was a coordinated extraction. I placed the phone face down on the passenger seat. The screen dimmed, then went black, returning the truck cabin to total darkness. Through the cracked windshield, the resort glowed warm and golden. Valets in red jackets laughed near the entrance. A limousine pulled slowly around the circular drive, its headlights sweeping across the manicured hedges. Somewhere on the third floor, behind curtains of imported silk, 800 guests were raising crystal glasses to toast the beautiful union of the Aldridge and Ashford families. None of them knew the groom's father had just been robbed by his own son. I turned the key. The engine coughed once, sputtered, then caught with a rough shudder that vibrated through the steering column and into my forearms. I pulled out of the parking lot without turning on the headlights. I did not want anyone inside that building to see me leave. The road from White Sulphur Springs wound through the Appalachian Mountains in long, sweeping curves. At this hour, the two-lane highway was deserted. Dense forest pressed against both sides of the asphalt, and the only light came from a thin sliver of moon hanging low above the ridgeline. The mountains rose around me like dark walls, ancient and indifferent. I drove in complete silence. No radio. No heater. Despite the damp chill clinging to my rental suit, the wet fabric from the dishwater steam in the corridor had soaked into my shirt collar, and the night air turned it cold against my skin. I did not adjust the temperature. I did not need comfort. Comfort was something I had denied myself for 30 years. And tonight, I understood that the denial had purchased nothing. I had sacrificed my own life to raise Jake with humility. I had hidden everything I built so he would learn the value of labor, the dignity of calloused hands, the moral weight of earning rather than inheriting. I had driven this same rusted truck past buildings I secretly owned, worn coveralls stained with oil, while managing an empire no one suspected existed. I had made myself small on purpose, believing that smallness would teach my son to be large in character. Instead, my smallness had taught him to be ashamed. He had looked at my grease-stained hands and seen weakness. He had looked at my rented suit and seen failure. He had looked at my modest savings account and seen an opportunity to fund his new family's ambitions without consequence. He never imagined the mechanic might fight back, because he never imagined the mechanic had anything worth fighting with. The road climbed higher into the mountains. My headlights cut through patches of low fog that drifted across the asphalt like ghosts. I pulled onto a narrow gravel shoulder near a scenic overlook and stopped the engine. Silence flooded in. Total, absolute, mountain silence. The kind of quiet that makes your own heartbeat sound intrusive. I stepped out of the truck. The gravel crunched beneath my scuffed shoes. Below me, the valley stretched out in complete darkness, not a single light visible for miles. Above me, the Appalachian ridgeline cut a jagged black line against the star-filled sky. These mountains were among the oldest on Earth. They had watched civilizations rise and collapse. They did not care about the problems of one 70-year-old man standing on their shoulder in a wrinkled rental suit. But I cared. I looked down at the dark valley and thought about what was buried inside these ancient hills. Coal. Millions of tons of it, compressed beneath layers of rock and time. Victor Ashford had made his fortune pulling that black mineral from the earth and burning it for profit. He believed coal was power. He believed the mountains belonged to men like him. He was wrong. I climbed back into the truck and sat with my hands resting on the wheel. The phone on the passenger seat remained dark and silent. No call from Jake. No apology. No explanation. These mountains had coal buried in their bones. But the man sitting in this truck had something buried far deeper. I pulled into the cracked concrete driveway at 17 minutes past 2 in the morning. The house looked exactly as it always had. Small, quiet, unremarkable. A single-story bungalow on a dead-end street in a working-class neighborhood on the south side of Pittsburgh, where every third house had a pickup truck in the yard and a basketball hoop bolted above the garage door. The porch light was off. I had forgotten to turn it on before I left for West Virginia 3 days ago. It did not matter. I had not expected anyone to be waiting for me when I returned. I climbed the 3 concrete steps, unlocked the front door, and stepped inside. Darkness greeted me. I did not reach for the light switch. I did not want to see the house clearly. Not tonight. I walked through the narrow hallway by memory, my fingers trailing along the wall where the paint had been worn smooth by decades of my passing. The floorboards creaked beneath my weight in the same places they always had. A familiar rhythm that once felt like home and now felt like evidence of a life spent standing still. The kitchen was small and barely functional. A scratched wooden table pushed against the far wall. Two mismatched chairs. A refrigerator that hummed too loudly. And a stovetop with one burner that no longer ignited. A single street lamp outside filtered through the thin curtains, casting a pale yellow light across the worn linoleum floor. Shadows stretched long and distorted across the countertops. I sat down at the table without removing my jacket. The damp rental fabric clung to my skin, cold and heavy. I placed my hands flat on the wood and stared at the wall directly in front of me. Linda's photograph hung there in a simple wooden frame. It was the only picture I had ever displayed in the house. She was 29 in that photograph, standing in the doorway of our first apartment, holding Jake against her chest. There's a scene. This is tiny fingers gripping the collar of her blouse. She was laughing, not posing, not performing, laughing with the kind of pure, unguarded joy that only exists when you believe the future is safe. The street lamp light fell across her face at an angle, illuminating her smile while leaving her eyes in soft shadow. I had looked at this photograph every single morning for the past 30 years. Some mornings it brought comfort. Tonight it brought something else entirely. I heard her voice. Not literally. Not as a ghost or a hallucination, but in the deep well of memory where certain words become permanent, where they stop being sounds and start being architecture. I heard Linda speaking from her hospital bed on the last night of her life. She had been weak. Her skin had gone pale and thin, almost translucent against the white sheets. The monitors beeped in slow, mechanical rhythm. Jake was asleep in a chair beside the bed, his 6-year-old body curled into a ball, his sneakers dangling above the floor. I was holding her hand. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was deliberate. "Frank," she whispered. And even in the memory, her voice was clear. "Promise me something. Anything. Don't let money replace love in our family. I've seen what it does. My sister's kids, your cousin's boys. They got everything handed to them, and it turned them into strangers. Promise me you'll raise Jake with his hands in the dirt. Promise me he'll know what it means to earn something. Promise me he'll be humble." I promised. I squeezed her cold fingers and promised with every broken piece of myself that I would keep our son grounded, that I would never let wealth corrupt him, that I would teach him the sacred value of work and sacrifice and quiet dignity. She died before sunrise. I kept that promise for 30 years. Tonight, sitting in this dark kitchen with dried spit still faintly stiff on my jaw, I finally understood the catastrophic cost of keeping it. I opened my old laptop. The screen flickered to life, its blue glow harsh against the surrounding darkness. I logged into the bank portal. My fingers moved steadily. The account ledger appeared. Balance: $0 and 0 cents. The number looked almost theatrical. A punchline without a joke. I pulled up the transaction history. The wire transfer was clean, precise, executed with the confidence of someone who had access to every security credential on the account. Jake had entered the shared password. He had answered the backup verification question, a question whose answer was Linda's favorite song, a detail only he and I knew. He had authorized the transfer using a digital signature that mimicked the authorization pattern I had established years ago. He had used every piece of trust I ever gave him as a key to open the door and empty the vault. The money had gone to Ashford Mountain Resources, LLC. I knew what that company was. I knew what Victor was using it for. And I knew, with the cold precision of a man who had quietly studied financial filings for decades, that Jake had not simply been tricked into transferring the funds. He had done it willingly. He had become part of the operation. My son was not a victim. He was an accomplice. I closed the laptop. The screen went dark. The kitchen returned to shadow. Linda's photograph watched me from the wall. Her frozen smile unchanged. her laughter preserved in a moment that no longer existed. I spoke to her quietly. Not because I believed she could hear me, but because some words need to be said out loud before they become real. You asked me to keep him humble, Linda. I kept him blind instead. I hid everything I was, so he would never be tempted by what I had. And instead of building his character, I built his resentment. He grew up ashamed of me, ashamed of this house, ashamed of these hands. He ran toward the first family that offered him gold, and he never once looked back to see if it was real. I paused. The refrigerator hummed. The street lamp flickered, once outside the window. I tried to teach him discipline. Instead, I accidentally taught him to worship wealth. The man Linda married would have picked up the phone. He would have called Jake with trembling hands and a breaking voice. He would have wept into the receiver and begged his son to explain, to apologize, to come home. He would have forgiven. He always forgave. That was the man Linda loved. Patient, gentle, endlessly willing to absorb pain if it meant protecting his child. That man died quietly at that kitchen table, and in his place, something else began to rise. Not rage, not grief. Something colder. Something with precision and patience, and the weight of decades behind it. Something that had been kept locked away beneath concrete and silence for longer than Jake had been alive. I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped softly against the linoleum. I stood and walked down the narrow hallway toward the back of the house. I passed the bathroom door. I passed Jake's old bedroom, still exactly as he left it when he moved out 8 years ago. Trophies on the shelf, baseball glove on the desk, a faded poster of a race car taped to the wall. I did not stop. I walked past the hallway photographs, past Linda's smile, past Jake's graduation portrait, past 30 years of carefully constructed normalcy, and I pushed open the garage door. The garage smelled the way it always had. Motor oil and old rubber and the faint metallic tang of rust. A bare bulb hung from the ceiling on a frayed cord, casting a weak yellow circle across the concrete floor. Tools hung on pegboard along the far wall, arranged by size and function with the precision of a man who treated his workspace as sacred. Wrenches, ratchets, screwdrivers, socket sets, a pneumatic impact gun dangling from a hook beside a coil of air hose. Everything in its place, everything ordinary, except nothing in this house had ever been as simple as it appeared. I stepped past the workbench where I had rebuilt hundreds of engines over 3 decades. My fingers brushed the scarred wooden surface as I moved toward the heavy steel tool cabinet pushed against the back wall. It was industrial grade, 6 feet tall, gunmetal gray, and loaded with enough equipment to anchor it firmly to the floor. Moving it required both hands and deliberate effort. I wrapped my fingers around the cabinet's edges and pulled. The steel base scraped across the concrete, with a low grinding sound that echoed through the quiet garage. Beneath the cabinet lay a square of rubber matting, darker than the surrounding floor, slightly more compressed from years of bearing weight. I bent down and peeled the mat back. Underneath was a steel floor safe, embedded directly into the concrete foundation of the house. It was commercial grade, unmarked, invisible, unless you knew precisely where to look and precisely what you were looking for. I had installed it myself 22 years ago, pouring fresh concrete around the housing on a Saturday afternoon while 8-year-old Jake played with a garden hose in the backyard. I crouched and turned the dial. 27 left, 11 right, 44. The tumblers aligned with a heavy metallic click that resonated through the still air. I pulled the door open. There was no cash inside. No gold. No bundled stacks of $100 bills. There were only 2 items resting on the cold steel shelf. A sleek black encrypted phone, sealed inside an airtight bag, and a thick leather-bound dossier embossed with 2 words on the cover. Aldridge Energy Partners. I lifted the phone first. It had not been powered on in 6 years. The last time I held it was the morning I decided to fully commit to the disguise, The morning I looked at Jake's college graduation photograph on the mantle and convinced myself that disappearing completely was the only way to protect him. I pressed the power button and waited. The screen illuminated slowly, the secure operating system cycling through its encrypted boot sequence. It connected to a private satellite network that fewer than 40 people in the country had access to. I entered a number from memory. It was a number I had not dialed in 6 years, but my fingers moved across the screen without hesitation. Some things the body remembers even when the mind has tried to forget. It rang once. Aldridge. The voice was immediate, sharp, completely alert despite the hour. Rebecca Torres, Senior Legal Counsel for Aldridge Energy Partners. In certain corporate circles, she was known as the surgeon, a woman who could dissect a billion-dollar conglomerate into component parts and reassemble them in her client's favor before opposing counsel finished their morning coffee. "Rebecca," I said evenly. "It is time." A brief pause. I heard the faint rustle of fabric, as if she had sat up in bed. "Frank." Her voice shifted. "Careful now. Precise. You have maintained the civilian identity for over a decade. If we reactivate your position, the entire framework of concealment collapses. Every subsidiary, every blind trust, every shell corporation that has been insulating your name from public record will become traceable." "Are you absolutely certain?" I looked down at my hands. Grease still darkened the creases of my knuckles. The overhead bulb cast deep shadows into the scars and calluses that mapped 4 decades of physical labor. These hands had changed oil filters and replaced serpentine belts for 30 years. They had also signed acquisition documents worth more than Victor Ashford's entire net worth. "The camouflage failed," I said quietly. "I wanted my son to understand the value of work. I wanted him to see dignity in labor. Instead, he saw poverty. He grew ashamed. He married into a family of frauds. And tonight he helped them steal what he believed was my last dollar, while his father-in-law spat in my face." Rebecca's tone shifted instantly. No sympathy. No hesitation. Pure operational focus. "What are your instructions?" "Unseal the primary trust. Reactivate all dormant accounts. And pull the complete intelligence file on Victor Ashford and Ashford Coal and Gas." I heard keystrokes through the phone. Rebecca worked fast. She always had. "I have the Ashford file open," she said after a moment. "Updated as of last quarter. Frank, his operation is collapsing. 3 coal mines shut down in the past 18 months. Revenue declining 40% year over year. The only thing keeping him solvent is a natural gas drilling project in the mountains of West Virginia." "I know about the drilling project," I said. "Then you should also know it is illegal," Rebecca continued, her voice tightening. "He is operating on federal land using permits that my analysts flagged as fraudulent over a year ago. We believe he bribed at least 2 local officials to obtain drilling authorization. The Environmental Protection Agency has not yet caught it. But it is only a matter of time. They will not need to catch it," I replied. "We are going to hand it to them." A beat of silence. Then Rebecca spoke again, and this time there was something different in her voice. Not surprise. Recognition. "Frank, the drilling site. Pull up the geographic overlay. Tell me, Victor Ashford's illegal gas operation sits on a ridgeline in Pocahontas County, West Virginia. The eastern boundary of his drilling zone runs directly adjacent to your largest renewable energy installation in the state." She paused. "Your wind farm, Frank. The one with 47 turbines generating electricity for over 40,000 homes. It has been operational for 6 years." The irony settled over me like cold water. "And your environmental monitoring system," Rebecca continued. "The automated sensors embedded throughout the wind farm perimeter, they have been recording atmospheric and groundwater contamination data since the turbines were installed. If Victor's drilling operation is leaking methane or chemical runoff, your sensors will have captured every single anomaly for the past 2 years." I exhaled slowly. The pieces were aligning with a precision that felt almost engineered by something larger than coincidence. Victor Ashford had built his survival on an illegal gas project carved into a mountainside. And the mountain next to it belonged to me. My turbines had been silently recording the evidence of his crimes while he sat in ballrooms toasting his own genius. Download the complete contamination dataset, I said. Every reading, every timestamp, every anomaly. Package it for federal review. And Victor? Rebecca asked. I looked around the garage. The pegboard tools. The oil-stained floor. The workbench, where Jake once sat as a boy, swinging his small legs and watching me work with wide, fascinated eyes. That garage had been the center of my disguise. The place where a billionaire pretended to be a mechanic. The place where a father pretended that hiding was the same as protecting. Victor Ashford believes he is the most powerful man in the Appalachian energy industry, I said. He believes the mountains belong to him. He just spat in the face of a man he considers a grease monkey from a strip mall garage. I picked up the leather dossier and held it under the bare bulb. The embossed letters caught the light. These hands poured motor oil for 30 years, Rebecca. But they also signed documents that controlled more electricity than Victor Ashford's entire coal empire could generate in a century. And tonight, those hands had work to do. The elevator opened onto the 38th floor of a glass and steel tower in downtown Pittsburgh. Torres Legal Group occupied the entire level. The reception area was polished concrete and brushed aluminum. Cold by design. The kind of space where sentiment had no jurisdiction. I stepped out at 7:45 in the morning. I had not slept. I was still wearing the wrinkled rental suit from the wedding, the collar stiff with dried sweat. The receptionist glanced up, registered my appearance, and returned to her screen without a word. She had been trained not to ask questions. Rebecca was waiting in the main conference room at the end of a long corridor. The room was surrounded on 3 sides by floor-to-ceiling windows. Morning light poured across the Monongahela River below, reflecting in long silver ribbons. On the far bank, the skeletal remains of an old steel mill stood rusting against the pale sky. A monument to an industry that once defined this city and then quietly died. I understood monuments to dead industries. I was about to build one for Victor Ashford. Rebecca stood at the head of a massive walnut conference table. 5 thick manila folders were arranged in a precise row. She looked at me the way a surgeon looks at an X-ray, already planning the incision. Sit down, Frank. You look like you have not eaten in 20 hours. I have not. I do not need food. I need the anatomy of the enemy. She opened the first folder. Victor Ashford. Age 67. Chairman of Ashford Coal and Gas. Headquartered in Charleston, West Virginia. On paper, an Appalachian energy titan. Coal mines. Natural gas extraction. Political connections stretching to 2 United States senators. She pointed to a column of numbers highlighted in red. Beneath the surface, his empire is hemorrhaging. 3 of 5 coal mines shut down in 18 months. Revenue dropped nearly 50%. He is siphoning corporate funds to maintain his personal lifestyle. Private jets, country clubs. The wedding you just attended was partially financed through an unaudited corporate expense account. And the gas project? I asked. Rebecca opened the second folder. His lifeline. Ashford Mountain Resources, LLC. Incorporated 3 years ago to develop a natural gas drilling operation in Pocahontas County, West Virginia. The project sits on federal land. Victor obtained permits through a local Bureau of Land Management field office. She paused. Those permits are fraudulent. 2 county-level officials signed off without conducting required inspections. Both received substantial payments through a consulting firm that exists only on paper. The firm's registered agent is Victor's personal accountant. Textbook bribery. If the Department of Justice picks this up, he faces mandatory minimums. I leaned back in the chair. And Jake? Rebecca opened the third folder. Her voice dropped slightly. Your son is not an innocent bystander, Frank. She placed a printed transaction log in front of me. Jake has been functioning as a financial courier for 8 months. The 200,000 from your joint account was not the first irregular transaction. We identified 6 prior wire transfers from Ashford's subsidiary accounts, all routed through Jake's personal banking credentials. Small amounts. 10,000 here, 15,000 there. Always below the federal reporting threshold. He was structuring deposits, I said quietly, smurfing, breaking large sums into smaller transactions to avoid compliance alerts. It is a federal crime. Your son has been laundering money for Victor's illegal drilling operation. The words settled into my chest like lead. My son was not a naive young man tricked by his father-in-law. He was an active participant. He had chosen this. Rebecca opened the 4th folder and placed a topographic map on the table. 2 shaded zones sat side by side on a mountain ridgeline. The western zone was marked in black, Ashford Mountain Resources, drilling site. The eastern zone was marked in green, Aldridge Wind Farm. 47 turbines. Victor's illegal operation, Rebecca said, tracing the boundary with her finger, sits directly adjacent to your largest wind farm in the state. Your turbines generate electricity for over 40,000 homes. His coal plant, 12 miles south, powers 12,000 and is losing customers every quarter to cheaper renewable contracts. She looked up. You are literally replacing him, Frank. Megawatt by megawatt. He just does not know the competition has a name, and that name belongs to the mechanic he spat on. The irony was almost unbearable. Victor mocked me as a grease monkey who could not afford a decent suit. Meanwhile, the turbines spinning silently above his drilling site were generating more electricity, more revenue, and more long-term value than his entire coal operation combined. He was screaming about power, while the actual power was standing in his hallway, wiping spit off its face. Rebecca opened the 5th folder. Your environmental monitoring array. 47 turbines equipped with atmospheric sensors, groundwater probes, and seismic monitors. The system was designed to measure ecological impact from the turbines. But because Victor's drilling site sits less than half a mile from your perimeter, the sensors have been passively recording contamination data from his operation for over 2 years. She placed a thick printout on the table. Charts, graphs, methane levels, groundwater chemicals, soil contamination. Every data point time-stamped and geolocated. This is not circumstantial, Frank. This is a scientific record of sustained environmental damage caused by illegal extraction on federal land. If we deliver this to the EPA, combined with the bribery documentation, Victor does not just lose his permit. He loses his freedom. I stood and walked to the window. The river moved slowly below. On the far bank, the steel mill skeleton stood silent. Pittsburgh was once the steel capital of the world. Then the industry collapsed and the city reinvented itself. Mills became museums. Smokestacks became landmarks. Victor Ashford was a coal man standing in a wind-powered world, screaming at the sky and calling it weakness. Buy his debt, I said without turning from the glass. Every outstanding commercial loan, every line of credit, every note with his name attached. I want Aldridge Energy Partners to own the financial ground beneath his feet. And the EPA? Prepare the contamination package. Every byte of sensor data. Every timestamp. But do not deliver it yet. I want to choose the moment. And Jake? The question hung in the morning air. I watched a barge move slowly down the river, low in the water, heavy with cargo. Jake chose to stand on the wrong side of the mountain, I said quietly. That is where he will fall. I drove my rusted pickup through the wrought iron gates of the Ashford estate in Charleston, West Virginia, the following afternoon. The property was designed to intimidate. Manicured lawns stretched in every direction. A marble fountain stood at the center of the circular driveway, water arcing gracefully from the mouths of carved stone lions. Imported sports cars gleamed in a row beside the 4-car garage. The stone facade of the mansion rose 3 stories high, columns flanking the entrance like sentinels guarding a kingdom. Hours earlier, I would have felt small pulling into this driveway. Now I saw debt disguised as elegance. Borrowed columns, leveraged marble, a fraud wrapped in landscaping. I parked behind a red European sports car and reached across to the passenger seat. A dusty cardboard box sat there, filled with old hand tools. Wrenches passed down from my father, a torque set I had used since my 20s. A socket kit with a cracked plastic case. It was the kind of gift a mechanic would bring to his son's new home. Humble, sentimental, perfectly in character. It was also perfect camouflage. Before stepping out of the truck, I reached into my jacket pocket and pressed the record button on the encrypted phone. The device was invisible, the microphone sensitive enough to capture conversation from 15 feet away. Every word spoken inside that house from this moment forward would be documented with crystal clarity. I walked up the stone steps and pressed the illuminated doorbell. After a long pause, the heavy oak door swung open. Victor Ashford stood in a silk bathrobe, a crystal tumbler of afternoon bourbon in his hand. His eyes narrowed immediately at the sight of my flannel shirt and worn work boots. "What do you want, Aldridge?" he demanded. "You embarrassed yourself enough at the wedding." I lowered my head slightly, allowing my shoulders to sag into a posture of submission. Every gesture deliberate, every breath calculated. "I brought Jake a wedding gift," I said softly, lifting the box of old tools. "They were my father's. I thought he might want them." Victor sneered but stepped aside reluctantly. "Leave them in the foyer. Do not touch anything else. And make it quick." I walked into the cavernous living room. Vaulted ceilings, Italian leather furniture, a crystal chandelier, the size of a small car. The air smelled of furniture polish and expensive candles. I set the box down carefully on a marble side table and stood with my hands clasped in front of me, projecting the image of a man who felt deeply out of place in a room this grand. Victor had already returned to the leather couch, bourbon in hand. He did not offer me a seat. He did not offer water. He simply reclined and studied me with the lazy contempt of a man who considered hospitality beneath him when directed at someone of my station. "Beautiful home, Victor," I said quietly, glancing around with what I hoped looked like genuine awe. "Your business must be doing very well." Victor's chest swelled. Flattery was the key that unlocked arrogant men. "Doing well is an understatement," he said, swirling his bourbon. "Ashford Coal and Gas is about to enter the most profitable phase in the company's history. We have secured a major natural gas extraction project in the mountains. 30-year projected yield. The permits alone are worth millions." "That sounds impressive," I said, keeping my voice humble. "How did you manage to get drilling permits on mountain land? I heard the regulations are very strict these days." Victor laughed and took a deep sip. The bourbon was loosening him exactly the way I needed. "Regulations are for people who do not know the right people," he said, waving his glass dismissively. "I take care of the local officials. I make sure the inspectors understand that cooperation is more profitable than obstruction. A few consulting fees here, a few contributions there. The paperwork moves through the system like butter." He winked. No. That is how real business works, Aldridge. Not changing oil in a parking lot." I nodded slowly, suppressing every impulse to respond. The recorder captured each syllable. Victor Ashford had just admitted to systematic bribery of federal land management officials on a high-definition audio device. He had done it casually, almost proudly, the way powerful men confess when they believe the audience is too insignificant to matter. The front door opened. Jake walked in with Nicole, both still dressed in golf attire from the country club. Jake stopped when he saw me. His expression shifted from surprise to irritation in less than a second. Nicole did not acknowledge me at all. She walked past as if I were part of the furniture. My eyes went to Jake's wrist. A brand new Rolex gleamed in the afternoon light. Gold case. Sapphire crystal. $40,000. Easily. I recognized the model instantly. "That is a beautiful watch, Jake," I said quietly. "New?" Jake glanced at his wrist and smirked. Wedding gift to myself, he said. Nicole's family has excellent taste. Did you buy it with the 200,000 you took from my account? The smirk held, but something flickered behind his eyes. He recovered quickly. Think of it as your investment in my future, Dad. Nicole's family knows how to make money grow. You just knew how to change oil. I kept my voice soft. Fragile. You used my security credentials, Jake. You forged the authorization. That is a federal crime. Jake poured himself a drink from a crystal decanter, entirely at ease. I did not steal from you, old man. I liberated that money from a dusty savings account and put it to work. You were sitting on it like a scared old dog guarding an empty bowl. You should be thanking me. Thanking you? Nicole's family is building something real. He continued, settling into the leather couch beside Victor. Something bigger than a two-bay garage in a strip mall. I am part of that now. This is my life. You had your chance to be something, and you chose to be a mechanic. That is not my problem. Victor chuckled approvingly and raised his glass toward Jake. The boy understands ambition. More than his father ever did. I stood there absorbing every word. The recorder was capturing it all. Jake's admission of the unauthorized transfer. His contempt for my perceived poverty. His conscious, voluntary participation in Victor's financial operation. He was not a coerced victim. He was a willing accomplice who believed his father was too weak and too poor to ever fight back. I lowered my head in rehearsed defeat. I should go, I murmured. I am sorry I bothered you. Yes, you should, Victor said sharply. Take your little toolbox memory and go back to your garage where you belong. I turned and walked slowly toward the hallway. I dragged my boots just enough to complete the illusion of a broken man retreating from humiliation. But as I passed Victor's private study, the door stood partially open. I glanced inside without breaking stride. Spread across the leather desk were 3 stacks of legal documents. Even from several feet away, my trained eyes caught the bright red stamps across the top pages. Notice of default and intent to foreclose. Final warning. The letters were bold, aggressive, unmistakable. Victor's empire was not just declining. It was being actively seized by creditors. I did not pause. I did not allow my steps to change rhythm. I continued down the hallway, through the grand foyer, and out the heavy oak doors into the afternoon sunlight. The warm air hit my face. I walked steadily to my truck, climbed inside, and closed the creaking metal door. I reached into my pocket and pressed stop on the recorder. Every word, every confession, every syllable of arrogance was now mine. Everything was moving with surgical precision until Rebecca stopped typing. It was late evening, nearly 11, and we had been working inside her corner office for 6 consecutive hours. The city skyline beyond the glass walls had shifted from sunset amber to electric blue to the scattered white glow of office buildings still lit by overnight cleaning crews. Empty coffee cups lined the edge of her desk. Legal documents covered every flat surface. The air smelled of printer ink and cold determination. For the first 30 minutes, everything had unfolded flawlessly. Rebecca confirmed that our Delaware proxy corporation had successfully acquired Victor's primary business loans from 2 regional banks. The transactions were clean, layered through intermediary holding companies that made the true buyer untraceable. Victor Ashford now owed millions of dollars to an entity he could not identify. An entity that answered directly to me. The drilling operations equipment leases are also secured, Rebecca said, scrolling through confirmation receipts on her screen. We purchased the outstanding balances from the leasing company at a 12% premium. Victor cannot operate a single piece of extraction machinery without our authorization. I nodded from the leather chair across from her desk. The web was closing. Each thread we pulled tightened the structure around Victor's empire, invisible, precise, suffocating. Then, a red alert flashed across Rebecca's terminal. Her fingers froze above the keyboard. The crease between her brows deepened as she leaned closer to the screen. "We have a complication," she said, her voice sharpening. I leaned forward. Explain. There is another buyer. Rebecca pulled up a new data feed, her eyes moving rapidly across the numbers. Hawthorne Resources. Based in Houston. They are a vulture capital firm specializing in distressed fossil fuel acquisitions. They buy toxic debt portfolios from failing coal and gas companies, strip the assets, liquidate everything recoverable, and exit with profit before the dust settles. The name registered. Hawthorne Resources was well known in energy finance circles. They were efficient, ruthless, and completely indifferent to the human cost of their operations. They did not care about justice or accountability. They cared about margins. They have submitted a bulk offer to the primary commercial lender holding Victor's remaining corporate debt. Rebecca continued, pulling up the bid details. $12 million for the entire portfolio. They want to acquire every outstanding note in a single transaction. If they succeed? I asked. Rebecca turned the screen toward me. Hawthorne dismantles Ashford Coal and Gas within weeks. They terminate employees, auction equipment, liquidate contracts, and push Victor into structured bankruptcy. She paused. But here is the critical problem. If Hawthorne controls the debt, Victor enters bankruptcy protection. A federal judge oversees the process. His personal assets are shielded. His criminal exposure is minimized because the focus shifts to corporate restructuring, not individual fraud. He escapes. I said quietly. Worse than that. He controls the narrative. He becomes the tragic executive, destroyed by aggressive Wall Street vultures. He gives interviews about corporate predators. Politicians who took his donations offer sympathetic statements. He avoids public humiliation. He never learns you were behind it. And most critically, Rebecca added, the EPA contamination evidence becomes irrelevant. Hawthorne will negotiate a settlement with federal regulators as part of the acquisition. A fine, a remediation plan. No criminal referral. The bribery charges disappear into administrative paperwork. The room felt colder. I stood and walked to the window. The Pittsburgh skyline glittered below. Steel and glass towers rising from the riverbanks, where foundries once belched smoke into clouds that turned the afternoon sky orange. This city understood what happened when powerful men escaped accountability. The pollution stayed long after the profits left. If Hawthorne wins, I said carefully, can we outbid them? Rebecca exhaled. We can, but it will cost significantly more than the debt is worth. Hawthorne offered 60 cents on the dollar for a distressed portfolio. That is aggressive but rational for their business model. To force them out, we would need to offer at least 70. Possibly higher. Offer 75. Rebecca turned toward me. That is $18 million for a portfolio with a recoverable value of approximately $12 million. You would be intentionally losing $6 million purely to secure the right to personally dismantle Victor Ashford. I am aware of the math, Rebecca. This is no longer a strategic acquisition. This is personal. It was always personal, I said evenly. The man spat in my face in front of 800 people. His son stole my savings and called me a scared old dog. My own child forged my credentials and laughed about it over bourbon. Every dollar I spend on this is an investment in consequence. Rebecca studied my face for a long moment. Whatever she saw there ended the debate. She turned back to her screen and began restructuring the offer. I will route it through the London proxy to add a layer of insulation. If Hawthorne investigates the competing bidder, they will hit a wall of British corporate filings that lead nowhere. Do it. Her fingers moved with rapid precision. Minutes passed in tense silence. The only sounds were keystrokes and the low hum of the ventilation system. I stood at the window and watched the city breathe below. Somewhere in West Virginia, Victor Ashford was sleeping soundly in his leveraged mansion, dreaming of gas wells and political favors, completely unaware that two predators were fighting over the carcass of his empire. The difference was simple. Hawthorne wanted profit. I wanted truth. Rebecca's desk phone rang. She answered, listened for exactly 8 seconds, and hung up. She leaned back in her chair and let out a long, controlled breath. Hawthorne withdrew, she said. The premium exceeded their return threshold. Our offer has been accepted by the lender. The air in the room shifted. It is done, Frank. The London proxy now holds every outstanding commercial note attached to Ashford Coal and Gas. Combined with the equipment leases and the drilling operation loans we acquired earlier today, Aldridge Energy Partners effectively controls the entirety of Victor Ashford's corporate debt. You own his company. You own his machinery. You own the financial ground beneath every building with his name on it. I returned to the chair and sat down. The weight of the moment pressed into my shoulders, not with exhaustion, but with the dense, heavy calm that comes from knowing a mechanism has been fully assembled and is now waiting for a single trigger. Now contact the EPA regional director, I said. Send every byte of contamination data from the wind farm sensors. 2 years of methane readings. Groundwater analysis. Soil samples. Timestamp. Everything. Make it airtight. Rebecca began typing. And schedule a secure meeting with the FBI field office in Charleston. I have high-definition audio recordings of a United States citizen admitting to systematic bribery of federal officials. I also have his son-in-law confessing on tape to unauthorized wire transfers and money laundering. And the National Energy Summit? Rebecca asked without looking up. I thought about Victor standing on that stage at the wedding reception, champagne in hand, surrounded by applause, radiating the confidence of a man who believed his throne was permanent. Victor wants to give a speech about the future of American energy, I said. I will make sure the future is in the audience when he does. Rebecca's fingers paused briefly over the keyboard. A thin smile crossed her lips, then vanished. She resumed typing. Saturday, she said. Victor's keynote is scheduled for 7 in the evening. I stood and straightened my jacket. Then I will be there at 6:59. 3 stacks of legal documents sat on the walnut conference table. Each stack was approximately 2 inches thick, bound with heavy clips, and flagged with colored tabs marking the signature lines. A solid gold pen lay beside them, perfectly aligned with the edge of the nearest folder. Morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long, warm rectangles across the polished wood. 3 stacks. 3 signatures. 3 detonations. Rebecca stood at the opposite end of the table, her hands resting flat on the surface. She had been there when I arrived at 7 in the morning. The coffee in front of her was already cold. She watched me with the focused stillness of someone who understood that the next 15 minutes would be irreversible. I sat down and pulled the first stack toward me. Stack 1, Rebecca said. Formal petition to the Bureau of Land Management, requesting immediate revocation of all drilling permits issued to Ashford Mountain Resources LLC on federal land in Pocahontas County, West Virginia, supported by 2 years of contamination data from your wind farm environmental monitoring array. Once filed, the BLM is legally required to initiate an emergency review. Victor's drilling operation will be suspended within 72 hours. I opened the folder. The documents were meticulous. Charts of methane levels exceeding federal thresholds. Groundwater analysis showing chemical markers consistent with unregulated hydraulic fracturing. Satellite imagery overlaying the drilling site boundary with the contamination dispersion pattern. Every data point time-stamped. Every reading sourced to a specific sensor on my wind farm perimeter. I signed the bottom of the final page without hesitation. I pulled the second stack toward me. Stack 2. Rebecca continued. Formal demand for immediate repayment of all outstanding commercial debt obligations held by Ashford Coal and Gas, now owned entirely by Aldridge Energy Partners through our proxy structure. Total callable amount, $18.4 million. Victor has no liquid assets sufficient to cover this demand. When we file, his company enters involuntary default. His corporate credit lines freeze. His stock, already trading at historic lows, will collapse the moment the filing becomes public. I signed those pages with a steady hand. The pen moved across the signature lines with mechanical precision. Each stroke felt like a bolt being tightened inside a machine that could not be disassembled once fully locked. I reached for the third and final stack. Rebecca placed her hand over the documents before I could open the folder. Her expression had changed. The professional detachment she wore like armor had softened into something more cautious, more human. "Before you sign this one," she said quietly, "we need to have a very clear conversation." I looked up at her. "About what?" "About Jake." She removed her hand from the folder but did not push it toward me. Instead, she folded her arms and spoke carefully. "Stack 3 is the formal evidence submission to the FBI field office in Charleston. It contains the complete audio recordings from Victor's home, the digital transaction logs showing 8 months of structured deposits, the wire transfer documentation from your joint account, and the forensic analysis linking Jake's personal banking credentials to every single illegal transfer." She paused. "When the FBI receives this, they will open a federal investigation into money laundering and wire fraud. Victor will be the primary target. But Jake is not a peripheral figure in this case, Frank. He is documented on 6 separate transactions. His voice is on the recording admitting to the unauthorized transfer. His digital signature is on the wire authorization." "I know," I said. "He will be indicted." Rebecca's voice was steady, but deliberate. "The minimum sentencing guidelines for structured financial transactions in support of an illegal enterprise carry 3 to 5 years in a federal facility. If the prosecution establishes that he knowingly facilitated bribery by moving funds to the Shell Consulting Company, the exposure increases. He is not going to receive a warning letter, Frank. He is going to be arrested, charged, and prosecuted." The conference room fell silent. Sunlight moved slowly across the table, illuminating the gold pen and the unsigned pages. I stared at the folder. The weight of it was not in the paper. For a fleeting, agonizing moment, the ice around my chest cracked. Not from anger, not from strategy, from something older and deeper, and far more dangerous than either. Memory. I saw Jake at 6 years old, standing in my garage on a Saturday morning, wearing oversized rubber boots and a Pittsburgh Steelers t-shirt 3 sizes too big. His small hands were wrapped around a crescent wrench that was almost as long as his forearm. He was trying to loosen a bolt on a brake caliper. His face scrunched with concentration, his tongue poking out of the corner of his mouth the way it always did when he was focused. "Dad," he had said, looking up at me with eyes so wide and trusting they could have stopped time. "I want to be like you when I grow up." I had laughed and ruffled his hair with a greasy hand. "You can be anything you want, kid. Anything at all." I taught him to change a tire that afternoon. We sat on the garage floor afterward, sharing a bottle of root beer, his small body leaning against my arm while the radio played country music through a speaker with a blown cone. He fell asleep against my shoulder before the sun went down. I carried him inside and laid him in bed, careful not to wake him, careful not to let go too quickly. That boy believed his father was the strongest man in the world. The memory dissolved. The conference room returned. The sunlight had shifted. Rebecca was watching me without interruption, allowing the silence to do its work. I saw Jake at the wedding, 10 feet away, watching Victor spit in my face, watching saliva slide down my cheek while 800 people stared. I saw his expression. Not horror, not rage, embarrassment. I heard his voice in the corridor. "Dad, you are embarrassing me. Just leave." I saw Jake in Victor's living room, Rolex on his wrist, bourbon in his hand, smirking. "I liberated that money. You were sitting on it like a scared old dog guarding an empty bowl." I saw him turn his back at the wedding. I saw him walk away without looking back. I saw him choose, consciously, deliberately, repeatedly, to align himself with the man who had publicly degraded his father rather than stand beside the man who had sacrificed everything to raise him. The crack in the ice sealed shut. The cold returned, denser than before. "He chose his side, Rebecca," I said. My voice was flat, absolute. He did not stumble into this. He was not manipulated by a desperate father-in-law. He volunteered. He looked me in the eyes and told me my life was an empty bowl. He stood 10 feet away, while a man spat in his father's face, and his only response was to tell me I was an embarrassment. I pulled the folder toward me and opened it. I raised a son who knew the value of a handshake, who watched me work with these hands every single day, who fell asleep on my shoulder in a garage that smelled like motor oil and root beer. I placed the tip of the pen on the signature line. That son does not exist anymore. The man who stole from me and laughed about it over bourbon is a stranger. I signed my name with steady precision. No tremor. No hesitation. I slid the completed stack across the table. File everything, but time it perfectly. I want EPA investigators and FBI agents arriving at the National Energy Summit exactly when Victor steps onto that stage to deliver his keynote. I want the future of American energy to greet him in person. Rebecca gathered the 3 stacks into her leather briefcase and locked the brass clasps. By Sunday morning, she said quietly, they will not have enough cash for gas station coffee. I looked once more at the morning light on the table where the documents had been. 3 signatures, 3 detonations, and no way back. There was never a way back, I said. There was only forward. The message arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, 4 days before the summit. I was sitting in my kitchen drinking black coffee and reviewing the final coordination timeline Rebecca had sent that morning. Every element was in position. The EPA regional director had received the contamination package and confirmed an active investigation. The FBI field office in Charleston had opened a preliminary case file based on the audio recordings and financial documentation. Federal agents were being briefed. Timing was being synchronized. The mechanism was fully assembled. Then my phone buzzed on the kitchen table. It was the first time Jake had contacted me since the wedding. For one involuntary second, something stirred behind my ribs. Not hope. I had burned hope to ash days ago. But the reflex of fatherhood is a stubborn thing. It pulses even when the nerve should be dead. I opened the message. Dad. Nicole and I found a property in the mountains outside Charleston. 5 bedrooms. 6 acres. Private gate. It is listed at $3.2 million. We need you to co-sign the mortgage as financial guarantor. The bank requires a secondary credit source, and Nicole's father is tied up in corporate restructuring right now. Sign the paperwork, and we can close by Friday. You owe me this much for all the years I had to pretend your life was enough. Do not make this difficult. I read it twice. Then a third time. Each sentence was a small, precise blade, designed to cut without concern for the wound it left. He was not asking. He was demanding. He was not expressing gratitude for 30 years of sacrifice. He was framing those years as a burden he had endured. A punishment he had survived. A sentence he had served in the prison of my modest life. My son had stolen $200,000 from my account. He had laundered money for a criminal enterprise. He had watched a man spit in my face and told me to leave. And now he was demanding that I guarantee a $3 million mortgage so he could purchase a mansion in the mountains of the state where his father-in-law was illegally drilling for gas on federal land. The audacity was so complete, it was almost architectural. I did not type a long reply. I did not explain. I did not threaten or lecture or beg him to reconsider the path he was on. I typed a single sentence. Enjoy the weekend, Jake. It is the last one you will ever be able to afford. I pressed send. The message turned green. Then I opened my phone settings and blocked his number. I blocked his email. I blocked his social media accounts. The digital cord between father and son was severed completely. He would receive no warning, no further communication, no chance to prepare for what was coming. 20 minutes later, I called First National Bank and spoke to the mortgage underwriting department. A bright, professional voice confirmed that Jake and Nicole Aldridge had listed me as primary financial guarantor on a $3.2 million luxury property purchase. They had submitted documentation claiming I was sole beneficiary of a substantial corporate trust. Those documents are fraudulent, I said calmly. I am not backing this mortgage. The applicants are financially insolvent and are currently subjects of an active federal investigation. Silence. Then a sharp intake of breath. Sir, this will trigger immediate default on the escrow. We will be required to report the forged guarantor documentation to compliance. Report it, I replied. Cancel the loan. I ended the call and placed the phone face down on the table. The kitchen was quiet. Linda's photograph watched from the wall. I did not look at it. That afternoon, I drove to the most exclusive tailor in Pittsburgh. The shop occupied the second floor of a converted brownstone in the Shadyside neighborhood. Dark mahogany walls, brass garment racks, the scent of cedar and fine wool. For 30 years I had dressed in denim and flannel, grease-stained jackets, and scuffed steel-toe boots. Every frayed collar and faded shirt had been a deliberate choice. A costume designed to make a billionaire invisible. The costume was no longer necessary. An older gentleman with a measuring tape draped around his neck circled me slowly, assessing my frame with professional precision. Hand-stitched Italian wool, he suggested. Charcoal black. Dense weave. It will move with authority. Make it precise, I said. He worked quietly, pinning fabric across my shoulders, adjusting the lapels, measuring the break of the trouser leg against my shoe. You have the build of someone who works with his hands, he observed. I do, I replied. But those hands are changing purpose. When the fitting was complete, I looked at myself in the full-length mirror. The charcoal black fabric absorbed the light instead of reflecting it. It made me look not wealthy, but inevitable. The color was deliberate. Charcoal, the color of coal after it has been burned. The color of an industry reduced to residue. I would wear Victor Ashford's Dying World on my shoulders when I walked into his final performance. I drove home with the garment bag laid carefully across the passenger seat. The afternoon sky was gray and heavy. Pressing low against the rooftops of my neighborhood, I parked in the cracked driveway and went directly to the backyard. For the next 20 minutes, I carried armloads of clothing from my bedroom closet to the rusted fire pit beside the back fence. Every flannel shirt, every pair of oil-stained jeans, every canvas work jacket and faded baseball cap, every steel-toe boot with worn soles and broken laces, I piled them high, 30 years of camouflage stacked in a mound of cheap fabric and honest wear. I poured lighter fluid in a slow, deliberate stream across the pile. The chemical smell cut through the cool afternoon air. I struck a single wooden match against the brick wall of the house and tossed it into the center. The flames erupted with a deep whoosh, sending a column of black smoke straight into the gray sky. Heat washed across my face. I stood on the cracked concrete and watched my civilian identity turn to ash. The collar of my favorite denim jacket curled and blackened. The stitching on a flannel shirt I had worn for 15 years dissolved into orange thread before vanishing completely. Work gloves I had used to rebuild 100 engines shriveled into dark, unrecognizable shapes. I felt nothing but clarity. 30 years of extreme personal sacrifice had been completely pointless. I had made myself small, hoping it would teach my son to value what mattered. Instead, my smallness gave him and his new family permission to step on me. The mechanic was Ash. What remained was the man who owned the wind. As the fire settled into a bed of glowing embers, my secure phone buzzed in my pocket. Rebecca. EPA confirmed. FBI confirmed. Federal teams are coordinated. Victor's keynote at the National Energy Summit is scheduled for Saturday evening. 7 sharp. Willard Intercontinental. Washington, D.C. I looked at the charcoal black suit hanging inside the house, visible through the kitchen window. It caught the late afternoon light, like something forged rather than sewn. Then I will be there at 6:59. The suit felt like armor. I stood in the lobby of the Walter E. Washington Convention Center. At 6:47 on a Saturday evening, surrounded by 1,200 people who had paid between $5,000 and $15,000 to attend the National Energy Summit. Banners hung from the ceiling. Logos of oil companies, natural gas conglomerates, and federal agencies covered every surface like war flags. The air smelled like cologne, catered salmon, and old money. I had never attended this event. Not once in 30 years. Aldridge Energy Partners had received invitations every single year. Rebecca had declined every single one. We operated in silence, behind shell companies and Delaware trusts, behind wind farms and turbine contracts and anonymous charitable donations. We did not attend galas. We did not shake hands in hotel ballrooms. We did not exist in public. Until tonight, Rebecca walked beside me in a dark navy suit, carrying a leather briefcase that contained 412 pages of evidence. 2 USB drives. 3 sealed envelopes addressed to the EPA Regional Administrator, the FBI Associate Director for Criminal Investigations, and the United States Attorney for the Southern District of West Virginia. She had not slept in 48 hours. Her eyes were calm. Her jaw was set. She looked like someone who had already decided how the evening would end. We passed through the main corridor. Men in suits nodded at us. Women in cocktail dresses smiled politely. Nobody recognized me. Nobody had ever seen my face connected to Aldridge Energy Partners. To them, I was just another gray-haired attendee with a name tag and a good tailor. The main ballroom was the size of a basketball court. Circular tables filled the floor. A raised stage dominated the far wall, flanked by 2 massive LED screens. The program listed Victor Ashford as the keynote speaker at 7 o'clock. His topic: American Energy Independence, Securing the Future Through Domestic Fossil Fuel Expansion. I almost laughed. Rebecca guided me to a reserved table near the center of the room. Table 14. She had arranged it through a contact at the Department of Energy who owed Aldridge a favor from a wind farm permitting dispute 3 years ago. I sat down. The chair was comfortable. The tablecloth was white. A glass of water sat beside a small card that read, Reserved Aldridge Energy Partners. It was the first time that name had appeared in public in 17 years. At 6:53, the lights dimmed slightly. A moderator took the stage. He introduced the evening's agenda: panels on carbon capture, discussions on grid modernization, and the highlight, a keynote from Victor Ashford, chairman of Ashford Coal and Gas, a man he described as a titan of American energy, a visionary who has powered Appalachia for 3 decades. I looked at my hands. They were clean. No grease. No calluses showing through bandages. The $8,000 suit covered everything I used to be, but I could still feel the ghost of every engine I had ever opened, every bolt I had ever turned, every night I had spent on a cold garage floor while Jake slept upstairs. At 6:56, I saw him. Victor Ashford entered from a side door near the stage. He wore a black tuxedo with a crimson pocket square. His hair was slicked back. His shoes reflected the stage lights. He was surrounded by 4 assistants and a woman I recognized from the photographs Rebecca had shown me, his personal attorney, Margaret Hale. Victor was smiling. He was shaking hands. He was laughing with a senator from Kentucky who had received $300,000 in campaign contributions from Ashford-affiliated PACs over the past 6 years. He had no idea that his drilling permits had been revoked 18 hours ago. He had no idea that his debt, all $18.4 million of it, was now owned by the man sitting at table 14. He had no idea that 3 federal agents were already in the building, seated in the back row, wearing gray suits and earpieces, waiting for a signal from the woman carrying the leather briefcase beside me. At 6:58, Rebecca leaned toward me. The EPA administrator received the contamination package at 4 this afternoon. Full data set. 2 years of methane readings, groundwater analysis, soil samples. She has already initiated an emergency review. The drilling site will be sealed by Monday morning. I nodded. The FBI team lead confirmed the audio recordings are admissible. They obtained a federal warrant for Victor's financial records 2 hours ago, and Jake's banking records were subpoenaed yesterday. I did not nod. I did not move. I stared at the stage where Victor was now climbing 3 short steps, waving to a standing ovation from 1,200 people who believed he was untouchable. At 6:59, the moderator returned to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our keynote speaker. For this evening, the chairman and CEO of Ashford Coal and Gas, Mr. Victor Ashford. The applause was enormous. Standing ovation, camera flashes. Victor stepped to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and smiled with the confidence of a man who had never been told no. I reached into my jacket pocket and felt the edges of a single photograph. Linda, taken 31 years ago, smiling in our kitchen, flower on her nose. Jake was 3 months old in her arms. She had written on the back in blue ink, "We built this family on love, not money." I placed the photograph face down on the white tablecloth and looked at the stage. Rebecca opened her briefcase. Victor cleared his throat and began to speak. "Good evening. It is an honor to stand before you tonight as we discuss the future of American energy." He got exactly 94 seconds into his speech. Then I stood up. 1,200 people turned their heads at the same time. I did not rush. I buttoned my jacket with one hand and stepped away from table 14. The chair scraped against the floor. The sound cut through the ballroom like a knife across glass. Victor was mid-sentence, something about pipeline expansion and quarterly projections, and his mouth stayed open for a full second before his brain caught up with his eyes. He saw me. I could tell because his left hand, the one resting on the podium, tightened. His fingers curled around the edge of the wood. His smile did not disappear. It froze. Like someone had pressed pause on a machine that had been running on arrogance for 67 years. I walked toward the stage. Every step was deliberate. Every step was measured. I counted them. 14 steps, from the table to the center aisle. 32 steps from the center aisle to the base of the stage. 3 steps up to the platform. I had counted them earlier in the afternoon when Rebecca and I had walked the venue during setup, posing as early guests checking seating arrangements. 49 steps total. I had rehearsed them in my mind, the way I used to rehearse engine disassembly sequences in my garage. Each movement precise. Each part in order. Nothing wasted. The murmuring started at step 20. By step 30, half the room was whispering. By step 40, the moderator had risen from his chair at the side of the stage and was looking at the security team near the exit doors. Rebecca was already standing, holding a laminated credential she had obtained through the Department of Energy, contact a speaker access badge that read, "Aldridge Energy Partners invited presenter." She held it up. The security team hesitated. That hesitation was all I needed. I reached the stage. Victor was staring at me. His crimson pocket square looked like a wound against his black tuxedo. His attorney, Margaret Hale, had risen from the front row and was moving toward the stairs. But Rebecca intercepted her, badge in one hand, briefcase in the other, and said something I could not hear. Margaret stopped. She looked at the badge. She looked at Rebecca. Then she sat back down. I climbed the 3 steps and stood 6 feet from Victor Ashford. The microphone was between us. "Who the hell are you?" Victor said. His voice was low, but the microphone caught every syllable and sent it across 1,200 silent faces. I did not answer immediately. I looked at the audience. Senators, CEOs, lobbyists, journalists, camera operators. Every face was turned toward me. Every phone was recording. I could see the red lights blinking on at least 40 devices. "My name is Frank Aldridge," I said. Nothing. No reaction. The name meant nothing to them. I was still just an old man in a good suit who had interrupted a keynote speech. "I am the founder and sole owner of Aldridge Energy Partners." The reaction was not immediate. It started in the 3rd row, a woman in a charcoal blazer who leaned toward the man beside her and whispered something. Then the 5th row. Then the 8th. Then the entire left side of the ballroom. I could see phones being checked, Google searches being run, faces changing from confusion to recognition to disbelief. Aldridge Energy Partners, the silent giant. The company that owned 47 wind farms across 6 states. The company that powered more than 320,000 homes with clean energy. The company that had never held a press conference, never issued a public statement, never revealed the name of its founder. Until now. Victor's face went white. Not gradually. Not in stages. All at once. Like someone had pulled a plug and drained the color from his skin. He recognized the name. He knew exactly what Aldridge Energy Partners was. Every coal executive in Appalachia knew. They just did not know who was behind it. You. Victor whispered. The microphone caught that too. Me, I said. I turned to the audience. 6 days ago, this man stood over me at his daughter's wedding and spat in my face. He called me trash. He called me a grease monkey. He seated me outside the ballroom, near the service hallway, because he was ashamed that his daughter was marrying the son of a mechanic. Silence. Absolute silence. Not a glass moved. Not a fork touched a plate. He did not know that the mechanic he humiliated owns every dollar of his debt. $18.4 million in commercial loans, equipment leases, and credit lines, all purchased by Aldridge Energy Partners 72 hours ago. I let that settle. I watched Victor's attorney reach for her phone. I watched the senator from Kentucky push his chair back 3 inches from the table. He did not know that the mechanic he spat on has spent 2 years collecting environmental data from 47 wind turbine sensors located adjacent to an illegal natural gas drilling operation on federal land in Pocahontas County, West Virginia, an operation run by Ashford Mountain Resources, LLC. An operation built on forged Bureau of Land Management permits obtained through bribery of 2 federal officials. The murmuring became a roar. Journalists stood. Cameras swung toward Victor. The LED screens behind us, which had been displaying Victor's keynote slides, flickered. Rebecca had coordinated with the AV team. The slides disappeared. In their place, a document appeared, the first page of the EPA contamination report. Methane readings, groundwater toxicity levels, soil analysis, satellite imagery showing the drilling site 300 yards from turbine number 31. Victor grabbed the podium with both hands. "This is a lie," he said. "This is a coordinated attack." I reached into my jacket and produced a small black USB drive. I held it up between 2 fingers so the cameras could see it. This drive contains audio recordings made 6 days ago inside the Ashford residence in Charleston, West Virginia. On these recordings, Victor Ashford admits to bribing federal officials. He admits to operating an unlicensed drilling site. He describes the bribery payments in detail. I placed the USB drive on the podium, 3 inches from Victor's trembling hand. And on these recordings, my own son Jake Aldridge admits to transferring $200,000 of my money into Victor's shell company, willingly, knowingly. The ballroom erupted. The ballroom did not calm down. It detonated. Chairs scraped. Voices collided. Journalists surged toward the stage, like water breaking through a cracked dam. Camera flashes turned the room into a strobe light. I stood still. Victor stood still. The USB drive sat on the podium between us like a black grenade with the pin already pulled. Victor turned to me. His eyes were red. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles jumping beneath his skin. He leaned toward the microphone and pointed one finger at my chest. "This man is a fraud," he said. "This is a setup. A competitor trying to destroy my company with fabricated evidence. I will have my attorneys play it," I said. I did not say it to Victor. I said it to Rebecca. She was standing at the AV control station near the left wall, where she had positioned herself 4 minutes before I stood up. She had already connected a second USB drive to the venue's sound system. The AV technician beside her looked at her badge, looked at the crowd, and pressed play. The first sound that filled the ballroom was ice clinking in a glass. Then Victor's voice, unmistakable, recorded in his own study 6 days earlier, captured by the device I had hidden inside the toolbox I brought as a wedding gift. "The permits are handled. 2 guys at the bureau signed off. Cost me $40,000 each. Cash. Through Whitfield Consulting. Nobody traces that back to me. 1,200 people heard every word. The speakers carried Victor's voice to every corner of the room, every table, every camera, every phone held up to record. The acoustics of the convention center were designed for keynote addresses and panel discussions. They worked just as well for confessions. Victor lunged for the podium microphone. Turn that off. Turn it off now. Nobody turned it off. The recording continued. The gas site is pulling 2.3 million cubic feet per day. No EPA inspection in 14 months. I've got a contact at the regional office who buries the reports. Costs me $15,000 a quarter. Best investment I ever made. Margaret Hale, Victor's attorney, stood up from the front row. Her face was gray. She was not moving toward the stage. She was moving toward the exit. I watched her gather her briefcase and walk, not run, but walk with the controlled speed of someone who understood that every second she remained in proximity to Victor Ashford was a second closer to disbarment. The recording kept playing. A second voice entered. Younger. Familiar. A voice I had heard say its first word at 11 months old. A voice I had taught to count, to read, to say please and thank you. A voice that had once called me Dad with a kind of reverence that made me believe I had done something right. Jake, the $200,000 cleared this morning. I used the joint account. He won't notice for at least a week. He barely checks it. The password was easy. Mom's song. I closed my eyes. I had read the transaction records. I had seen the wire confirmations. I had known, intellectually, that Jake had done this, but hearing his voice casual, confident, dismissive describe how he had stolen from me, using his dead mother's favorite song as the key, was something different. It was not information. It was a wound. It opened somewhere behind my ribs and spread outward like a crack in old concrete. The audience heard it too. The murmuring stopped. The frenzy paused. 1,200 people fell silent again. Because they understood what they were listening to, not just a financial crime, but a son's betrayal of his father. Performed with the ease of someone ordering coffee, Victor's voice returned on the recording. Good. Tell him it's an investment if he asks. By the time the gas site is operational, we'll have pulled enough to cover everything. Your father-in-law won't see a dime, but he won't know the difference. A mechanic doesn't read financial statements. I opened my eyes. Victor was gripping the podium with both hands. His knuckles were white. His crimson pocket square had come loose and hung from his breast pocket like a flag of surrender. He was staring at the speakers mounted on the ceiling as if he could silence them with his eyes. Then the doors opened. 3 men in gray suits entered from the rear of the ballroom. They walked in a straight line down the center aisle, the same aisle I had walked 4 minutes earlier. They did not hurry. They did not speak. Each one wore an earpiece and a federal badge clipped to the breast pocket. The lead agent, a man in his 40s with a shaved head and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from Pittsburgh limestone, reached the base of the stage and looked up at Victor. Mr. Ashford. I'm Special Agent Daniel Correa, Federal Bureau of Investigation. You are under arrest for wire fraud, bribery of federal officials, and conspiracy to commit environmental violations under the Clean Air Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act. Please step down from the stage. Victor did not move. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. 2 agents climbed the stairs, one on each side. They reached Victor simultaneously. The handcuffs clicked, a small, metallic sound that somehow cut through the noise of 1,200 gasping voices, scraping chairs, and shouting journalists. Victor's hands were pulled behind his back. His tuxedo jacket bunched at the shoulders. His crimson pocket square fell to the stage floor. I stepped aside. I did not look at Victor as they led him past me. I looked at the audience. In the 7th row, near the far right aisle, I saw a young woman rise from her chair, dark hair, green dress, hands covering her mouth. Nicole. She stared at the stage. She stared at the handcuffs on her father's wrists. Then she looked at me. Our eyes met for exactly 2 seconds. I saw something in her face that I recognized, the expression of a child watching a parent become a stranger. She turned and walked out of the ballroom through a side door. She did not look back. The cameras followed Victor. The agents led him through the center aisle toward the exit. Journalists shouted questions. Phones recorded. Flashes exploded. Victor Ashford, titan of American energy, coal king of Appalachia, the man who had spat in my face 6 days ago, was escorted out of the National Energy Summit in handcuffs, broadcast live to every network in the country. I stood alone on the stage. The podium microphone was still on. The LED screens behind me still displayed the EPA contamination data. The USB drive still sat on the polished wood surface. I picked up the USB drive. I put it in my pocket. I straightened my jacket, and I walked down the 3 steps, back to table 14, where Linda's photograph still lay face down on the white tablecloth. I turned it over. Her smile. Flower on her nose. Blue ink on the back. I sat down. The ballroom was chaos. But at table 14, it was quiet. I looked at her face and whispered, "It is done." The news reached Jake before midnight. Every network carried it. Every cable channel. Every news website. Every social media platform. The footage was everywhere. Victor Ashford in handcuffs, led through the center aisle of the National Energy Summit by 3 FBI agents, while 1,200 guests watched, and journalists screamed questions into the chaos. The video had 14 million views within 3 hours. By morning, it would pass 40 million. I know this because Rebecca tracked it. She sent me the numbers in a text message at 11:17 that night while I sat in the back seat of a black sedan heading south on Interstate 81 toward Pennsylvania. I did not watch the footage. I did not need to. I had been standing on that stage. I had heard the handcuffs click. I had seen the crimson pocket square fall to the floor like a flag torn from a burning building. But Jake watched it on his phone. Rebecca's team had maintained passive surveillance on Jake since the morning I signed the 3 stacks. Not wiretaps, not cameras, just digital monitoring, credit card activity, cell tower pings, public social media. Legal, documented, admissible if needed. At 10:41 that evening, Jake's phone pinged a cell tower in White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia. He was still at the Greenbrier. Still in the resort where 6 days earlier he had turned his back on me while his father-in-law's spit dried on my face. At 10:43, Jake made a phone call. Not to me. Not to a lawyer. To Nicole. She did not answer. He called again at 10:45. 10:48. 10:51. 10:54. 10:57. 7 calls in 16 minutes. Each one went to voicemail. Each voicemail lasted between 4 and 11 seconds, too short to leave a real message, too long to be accidental. I imagine he was trying to speak but could not find the words. I imagine the silence on the other end of the line sounded like the rest of his life. At 11:03, Nicole sent a text message. Rebecca obtained it later through the FBI's discovery process during the pre-trial phase. It was 4 sentences long. I saw everything. My father is in custody because of your family. Do not contact me again. My attorney will handle the annulment. 4 sentences. 12 years of courtship, 2 years of engagement, 6 days of marriage dissolved in 4 sentences, and a period at the end of each one. I did not feel satisfaction when Rebecca read it to me. I did not feel vindication. I felt the weight of something I had built Jake's entire life. Every meal I cooked, every school form I signed, every late night I spent awake worrying about his future collapse into a pile of rubble that nobody would ever clean up. Nicole filed for annulment the following Monday. The grounds were fraud, specifically that Jake had concealed material financial obligations and criminal exposure prior to the marriage. The filing cited the $200,000 wire transfer, the 6 prior structured deposits, and the FBI's pending indictment. A West Virginia family court judge granted the emergency petition within 72 hours. The marriage was erased, legally, It had never existed. Jake was served the annulment papers at the Greenbrier, where he had remained because he had nowhere else to go. The $3.2 million mortgage I had canceled was for a house he would never own. The joint account I had shared with him was frozen by federal order. His personal savings, which Rebecca's forensic team estimated at approximately $11,000, would not cover a month of the life he had been living. On Wednesday morning, 4 days after the summit, Jake called me. I was in my kitchen in Pittsburgh, the same kitchen where I had sat in darkness the night I discovered the missing $200,000. The same table, the same chair. Linda's photograph was back on the wall, in the frame where it had always been. Morning light came through the window above the sink and fell across the floor in a pale rectangle that reminded me of the shape of a coffin. The phone rang. I looked at the screen. Jake. I had unblocked his number the night before, not because I wanted to speak to him, because I knew he would call, and I wanted to hear what he had left to say. I answered, "Dad." His voice was different, smaller. The confidence was gone, the casual cruelty that had colored his words at the wedding. "You're embarrassing me. Just sit down. This isn't your world," had been stripped away. What remained was the voice of a boy who had run out of rooms to hide in. "Dad, I need help." Nicole left. Victor's in federal custody. The FBI called my attorney and said I'm a person of interest in a wire fraud investigation. They said I could face 3 to 5 years. "Dad, please." I listened. I let every word land. I let the silence after each sentence stretch until it became unbearable for him and meaningless for me. "I know I made mistakes," he continued. "I know I took the money. I know I should have told you. But Victor, he said it would come back. He said the gas project would cover everything. He promised me, Dad." "He promised. He promised you," I repeated. "Yes, and your mother." "What did she promise you?" Silence. Long. Heavy. The kind of silence that has weight and temperature. I could hear him breathing through the phone, shallow, uneven, the breathing of someone who has just realized that the floor beneath them is not solid. "She promised me that love was enough," Jake said quietly. "No," I said. "She promised you that love required honesty. She promised you that love required sacrifice. She promised you that the easiest path was always the most expensive one. She told you those things every night before bed, until she could not speak anymore. And you forgot every single one of them." Jake was crying. I could hear it, the wet, broken sound of a grown man weeping into a phone at 9 in the morning in an empty resort room where his marriage had ended and his freedom was disappearing. My son, my only son, the boy I had carried on my shoulders through the Pittsburgh Zoo when he was 4. The boy who had fallen asleep in my lap during thunderstorms. The boy who had once told me, at 6 years old, that he wanted to be exactly like me when he grew up. I closed my eyes. "Dad, please. Just tell me what to do." I opened my eyes. I looked at Linda's photograph on the wall. Her smile. Flower on her nose. "Hire a lawyer, Jake. A good one. Tell the truth. All of it. Cooperate fully with the FBI. Accept whatever sentence they offer. Will you help me? Will you come with me?" The morning light shifted on the floor. The coffin-shaped rectangle moved an inch to the left. "No," I said. I hung up. 10 days passed. I spent them at the wind farm. Not the office in Pittsburgh, not the 38th floor with its glass walls and leather chairs and the skyline that made men feel important. I went to the farm itself. Aldridge Wind Farm Number 1. The original. 47 turbines spread across a ridge in Somerset County, Pennsylvania. Each one 280 feet tall, each one turning slowly in the Appalachian wind like a white clock counting hours that no one owed. I had built the first turbine 26 years ago. Linda was already gone by then. Jake was 11. I had driven out to this ridge on a Sunday morning with a set of blueprints, a thermos of black coffee, and a promise I made to myself that the money from Aldridge Energy Partners would never touch my son's life until he was ready to understand what it meant. I had kept that promise. I had kept it so well that my son grew up believing I had nothing, and he married into a family that confirmed his belief. And he stole from me because he thought I would not notice and would not matter, even if I did. The farmhouse sat at the eastern edge of the property, a quarter mile from turbine number 1. It was small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with a gas stove that I had repaired myself 9 years ago. The porch faced east. Every morning the sun came over the ridge and hit the porch boards at exactly 6:14, and I would sit in a wooden chair with coffee and watch the turbines turn. I had not spoken to Jake since the phone call. I had not spoken to Rebecca either, except once a brief call to confirm that the EPA had sealed Victor's drilling site and that the federal grand jury had issued indictments for Victor, 2 Bureau of Land Management officials, and an accountant named Gerald Whitfield, who ran the consulting firm used to funnel bribery payments. Jake was listed as an unindicted co-conspirator. His cooperation with the FBI, which, according to Rebecca, had begun 2 days after our phone call, had earned him a deferred prosecution agreement. No prison time. 5 years of probation. Full restitution of the $200,000, plus penalties. A felony on his record that would follow him for the rest of his life. I did not feel relief. I did not feel justice. I felt the wind. On the 10th morning, I was sitting on the porch at 6:20 when I saw a car turn onto the gravel road that led to the farmhouse. It was not a car I recognized. A silver sedan, mid-range, rental plates. It moved slowly, kicking up dust that hung in the morning air like smoke from a fire that had already gone out. The car stopped 50 yards from the porch. The engine cut. The dust settled. The driver's door opened, and Jake stepped out. He looked different. Not older. 10 days does not age a man's face, but diminished. The word came to me like a diagnosis. He was wearing jeans and a plain white t-shirt. No watch. No designer sunglasses. No Italian loafers. His hair was uncombed. His shoulders were drawn inward, as if his body was trying to occupy less space in the world than it used to. He walked toward the porch. His steps were slow, uncertain. The gravel crunched under shoes I did not recognize, plain brown boots, scuffed at the toes. The kind of shoes a man buys when he has $11,000 and no future. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. 3 wooden steps. The same 3 steps I had rebuilt 2 summers ago when the middle board cracked during a rainstorm. I had replaced it with white oak, sanded it, sealed it. The grain was still visible under the morning light. Jake looked up at me. His eyes were swollen. Not from crying, from not sleeping. From 10 days of phone calls with lawyers, FBI agents, and bank officers who spoke to him in the flat. Careful language of people who are documenting everything you say. "Dad," he said. I did not respond. I took a sip of coffee. The mug was ceramic, white, with a small chip on the rim that had been there since 2014. Linda had bought it at a flea market in Johnstown. I never replaced it. "I came to apologize," Jake said. He waited. I let him wait. The turbines turned behind me. The wind was steady, 8 miles per hour from the northwest, enough to generate power, but not enough to make noise. The blades moved in silence, like hands erasing something from a blackboard. "I took your money. I lied to you. I let Victor treat you like garbage, and I stood there and watched. I turned my back on you at the wedding because I was ashamed of who you were. And the whole time," his voice cracked, "the whole time, you were the most powerful person in the room. And I didn't know. Because you never told me. Because you never asked," I said. Jake flinched. Not physically, internally. I saw it in his eyes. The way the pupils contracted, the way his mouth opened and then closed again, as if the words he had prepared were suddenly insufficient. "I cooperated with the FBI," he said. "Full testimony. Everything about Victor's operation. The transfers, the permits, the shell companies. Rebecca's team, your team, they confirmed it. I signed the deferred prosecution. 5 years probation. Full restitution. I know, I said. I want to come home, Dad. The wind shifted. The turbines adjusted a slight mechanical tilt, imperceptible to anyone who did not know what to look for. But I knew. I had designed the pitch control system myself, 20 years ago, in a garage that smelled like motor oil and sawdust. This is not your home, Jake, I said. This has never been your home. You chose your home when you chose Victor's money over your father's table. You chose your home when you used your mother's favorite song to steal from me. Jake lowered his head. A single tear fell from his left eye and landed on the gravel. I watched it darken a stone, the size of a penny. What do I do now? He whispered. I reached into my shirt pocket and pulled out a white business card. I had placed it there that morning, before the coffee, before the sunrise, because I knew he would come. A father always knows. I held it out between 2 fingers. Jake climbed the 3 steps. He took the card. He looked at it. David Moreno. SQ. Pro bono. Legal services. Pittsburgh. Pa. He is a good man, I said. He will help you rebuild. But you will do it alone. The way I did. The way your mother wanted. Jake held the card with both hands. He looked at me. His mouth trembled. He wanted to say something I could see, the words stacking behind his teeth like cars stopped at a red light. But nothing came out. He turned. He walked down the 3 steps. He crossed the gravel. He opened the car door. He sat inside. He did not start the engine for a full minute. I counted. 60 seconds of a man sitting in a rental car, holding a business card, staring at a farmhouse where his father sat drinking coffee from a chipped mug. Then the engine started. The silver sedan pulled away. The dust rose and settled. The gravel went quiet. I looked at the turbines. They were still turning. They would always be turning. 8 months changed everything and nothing. Victor Ashford was sentenced on a Tuesday in November. The United States District Court for the Southern District of West Virginia. Case number 5, 24, CR 00187. I was not in the courtroom. I did not need to be. Rebecca sent me the transcript by secure email that evening, and I read it at the kitchen table in Pittsburgh with a cup of coffee that went cold before I finished the first page. The charges were extensive. Wire fraud, 18 counts. Bribery of federal officials, 4 counts. Conspiracy to violate the Clean Air Act, 2 counts. Conspiracy to violate the Safe Drinking Water Act, 3 counts. Operating an unlicensed extraction facility on federal land, 1 count. Tax evasion related to unreported income funneled through Whitfield Consulting, 6 counts, 34 counts total. Victor pleaded guilty to 22 of them as part of a cooperation agreement that spared him a trial, but did not spare him the sentence. 14 years. Federal prison. No parole eligibility for 11 years and 8 months under federal sentencing guidelines. A fine of $4.7 million. Forfeiture of all assets connected to Ashford Coal and Gas, Ashford Mountain Resources LLC, and 3 additional shell entities the FBI had uncovered during the investigation. The Ashford estate in Charleston, the house where I had delivered a toolbox and recorded a confession, was seized. The fleet of vehicles, the art collection. The wine cellar that Victor had once bragged contained bottles older than most marriages. All of it, gone. Gerald Whitfield, the accountant, received 6 years. The 2 Bureau of Land Management officials, whose names I never learned and never wanted to learn, received 4 years each. Margaret Hale, Victor's attorney, was not charged but surrendered her license to the West Virginia State Bar in a voluntary disbarment agreement that allowed her to avoid a formal disciplinary hearing. She moved to Florida. I do not know what she does there. I do not care. The drilling site in Pocahontas County was sealed permanently. The EPA classified it as a Level 2 contamination zone, requiring long-term remediation, Estimated cleanup cost, $12 to $15 million over 7 years. Aldridge Energy Partners contributed $4 million toward the remediation fund. I did not publicize this. I never publicize anything. Jake served no prison time. The deferred prosecution agreement held. He cooperated, fully testified before the grand jury, provided transaction records, identified the shell company structures, confirmed the bribery timeline. The FBI case agent told Rebecca that Jake's testimony was the most detailed and forthcoming cooperation we received from any witness in this case. I do not know if that was courage or desperation. I suspect it was both. Jake moved to Morgantown, West Virginia. David Moreno, the pro bono attorney whose card I had given him on the porch, helped him negotiate the probation terms and connected him with a job placement program for individuals with federal records. Jake found work at an auto repair shop on University Avenue, 6 blocks from the West Virginia University campus. He changed oil. He rotated tires. He replaced brake pads and serpentine belts and alternators in cars owned by college students and single mothers, and retired teachers who paid with checks that sometimes bounced. He earned $14.75 per hour. I learned this not from Jake, but from Rebecca, who maintained a quarterly update on his status as part of the restitution monitoring. Jake had repaid $18,000 of the $200,000 he owed. At his current rate, full restitution would take approximately 8.5 years. He lived in a 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. He owned no car. He walked to work. He walked home. He ate at a diner on Pleasant Street where the Tuesday special was meatloaf and mashed potatoes for $6.95. He had not called me. I had not called him. 8 months of silence between a father and a son who lived 114 miles apart. Nicole Ashford, Nicole Pemberton, as she had reverted to her mother's maiden name, filed for legal separation from the Ashford Family Trust in January. By March, she had relocated to Richmond, Virginia, where she took a position as a junior analyst at a nonprofit focused on rural healthcare access in Appalachian communities. In April, Rebecca's quarterly report noted that Nicole had begun a relationship with a physician named Dr. Thomas Calloway, a family medicine resident at VCU Medical Center. They were photographed together at a charity gala in Richmond. Nicole, in a simple black dress, smiling in a way that I had never seen during the 6 days she was married to my son. I looked at that photograph for a long time. Not because of Nicole, because of the smile. Because it reminded me that people can recover from disasters they did not create. Nicole had not chosen her father's crimes. She had not chosen Jake's betrayal. She had chosen to leave, and leaving had saved her. I wondered if Jake would ever learn to smile like that again. The media cycle had moved on. The story of the mechanic billionaire who destroyed a coal empire at the National Energy Summit had burned hot for 3 weeks. Front pages, cable news panels, podcast episodes, a documentary crew that Rebecca declined on my behalf. Then it faded. Other scandals. Other arrests. Other men in handcuffs being led through other ballrooms. The world has an unlimited appetite for destruction and a very short memory for the people who survive it. I returned to my routine. The Pittsburgh house. The kitchen table. The chipped mug. The photograph of Linda on the wall. Coffee at 5:45. The morning light through the window above the sink. I drove to the wind farm on weekends. I walked the ridge. I checked the turbines not because they needed checking, but because the sound of the blades cutting through air at 280 feet was the closest thing to peace I had found in 70 years of living. Rebecca called on a Thursday evening in late April. Her voice had a quality I had not heard before. Not urgency, not caution, but something softer. Anticipation. Frank. The foundation paperwork is finalized. The board is confirmed. The funding is allocated. We are ready to launch whenever you give the word. I set down my coffee. Saturday, I said. We launch on Saturday. Saturday came with clear skies and a wind out of the west that bent the grass along the ridge like a congregation bowing its head. I stood on a wooden platform that had been built overnight at the base of turbine number 1. The platform was simple pine boards. No paint. No banners. No corporate logos. Rebecca had suggested a podium with the Aldridge Energy Partners insignia. I told her no. She suggested a backdrop with the foundation's name printed in gold lettering. I told her no. She suggested chairs for the press. I told her they could stand. The only decoration was a framed photograph mounted on an easel at the center of the platform. Linda. The same photograph. The same smile. Flower on her nose. Jake at 3 months old in her arms. The blue ink on the back that read, "We built this family on love, not money." 214 people attended. Not 1,200. Not 800. 214. Former coal miners from Pocahontas County, Raleigh County, McDowell County, and Fayette County. Men and women who had spent decades underground, pulling black rock from the earth to heat homes and power factories that no longer needed them. They came in pickup trucks and old sedans. They wore work boots and flannel shirts and jackets that had been washed enough times to lose their original color. They stood in the grass in front of the platform and looked at me with the expression I recognized from my own mirror, the face of someone who has worked hard and been forgotten. Rebecca stood to my left. She wore a gray suit. Her briefcase was absent for the first time since I had known her. In its place, she held a single sheet of paper, the charter of the Linda Aldridge Foundation. I stepped to the microphone. It was a simple standing mic on a chrome pole, the kind you see in church basements and VFW halls. The wind made it hum for a moment before I spoke. My name is Frank Aldridge. Most of you do not know me. Some of you may have seen my name in the news. I am not here to talk about what was in the news. I am here to talk about what happens next. I looked at the faces. Weathered. Tired. Skeptical. These were not gala guests. These were not senators or CEOs. These were people who had been told for 20 years that their industry was dying and had been offered nothing to replace it. No retraining, no relocation, no second chance. They had been left in hollowed-out towns with closed minds and empty main streets and a silence that was not peaceful but abandoned. 47 years ago, I was a mechanic. I fixed engines for a living. My hands looked like yours. My paycheck looked like yours. My wife was a social worker who believed that every person in Appalachia deserved dignity, regardless of what they did for a living or how much money they earned. Her name was Linda. I paused. The wind turned the turbines above us. The blades cast moving shadows across the platform like the hands of a clock sweeping across a table. Linda died 30 years ago. She asked me to raise our son with humility. She asked me to remember where I came from. I kept those promises as best I could. Some of them I kept well. Some of them I failed. But there was one promise I never made to her because she never had to ask. She knew I would do it on my own. I unfolded a piece of paper from my shirt pocket. The wind caught its edge. Today I am announcing the creation of the Linda Aldridge Foundation. This foundation will fund the complete retraining of former coal and fossil fuel workers across Appalachia. The program includes full tuition for technical certification in renewable energy systems, wind, solar, grid management, and electrical engineering. It includes a living stipend of $2,000 per month for each enrolled participant for up to 24 months. It includes job placement partnerships with 11 energy companies operating in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Ohio. And it includes childcare support for participants with families. Because Linda would have insisted on that, and she would have been right. The crowd was silent. Not the silence of a gala ballroom, not the silence of shock or spectacle. The silence of people listening. The foundation is funded by a personal allocation of 90% of my total assets. I will not disclose the exact figure today, but I will tell you that it is enough to retrain every displaced energy worker in the four-state region for the next 15 years. A murmur moved through the crowd. Not loud. Not dramatic. A low sound. Like wind passing through a stand of trees. A woman in the third row, mid-50s, gray hair pulled back. A jacket with a faded United Mine Workers patch on the shoulder pressed her hand to her mouth. A man beside her, tall, bearded, wearing steel-toed boots caked with red clay, looked down at the ground and then back up at me. He nodded once. That was all. I folded the paper and returned it to my pocket. I am not a politician. I am not a philanthropist. I am a mechanic who built a company because the wind was free and the technology was ready and nobody else was paying attention. I stand here today because a woman I loved believed that the measure of a life is not what you accumulate, but what you leave behind. I looked at the photograph on the easel. Linda's smile. The flower. The baby. The blue ink. This is what I leave behind. I stepped away from the microphone. I did not wait for applause. There was none. There was something better. A silence that meant understanding. 214 people standing in the grass at the base of a wind turbine, looking at an old man who had just given away everything he had because a woman who died 30 years ago had taught him what everything was worth. Rebecca touched my arm. I looked at her. Her eyes were wet. She did not speak. She did not need to. I walked off the platform and across the grass toward the ridge. The turbines turned above me, all 47 of them. 280 feet tall, white against the blue sky, their blades cutting arcs through the Appalachian air, with a sound like breathing, like the mountains were inhaling and exhaling. Like the earth was alive and patient and indifferent to the small dramas of men who thought they owned it. I reached the edge of the ridge. Below me, the valley stretched south toward West Virginia. Green hills, winding roads, small towns with church steeples and water towers and houses where families were waking up to another Saturday morning. Somewhere down there, in Morgantown, my son was walking to work at an auto repair shop, $14.75 an hour. Brown boots, a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. He was alive. He was free. He was paying his debt, one oil change at a time. I did not know if he would ever come back to me. I did not know if I would ever hear his voice again. I did not know if the distance between us, 114 miles of highway and a lifetime of silence, would ever close. But the wind remained. It had been here before I arrived. It would be here after I was gone. It did not care about money or revenge or betrayal or justice. It simply moved. It turned the blades. It powered the homes. It bent the grass. It carried the sound of my wife's voice across 30 years of absence and set it down, gently at my feet. I closed my eyes. I let it pass through me. The wind remained.